Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford. He is my partner in crime, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you from different locations at Lambeau Field. And Wes, speaking of different locations, you are in a brand new spot, my friend. Tell me what sent you from whence you are now coming.
Well, Duke Bobber is the one that sent me from whence I am now coming. When you use your boss's office too much, eventually he just kicks you out. So I think actually the format of the show now moving forward should be I just end up in random parts of the building for Packers Unscripted.
Okay.
Today we are coming to you live from the 5th floor suites, or the hallways right outside of it. I'll be honest with you, Mike, this is pretty nice. It's my first time, 7 years as a Green Bay Packers employee, my first time ever being on the 5th floor. And yeah, I could get used to this.
Okay. I like the it's not nice new look. I like the background, looks sharp. Well,
depth of feel, I think, is what Tyler Gajewski calls it. Depth of feel.
Okay. Well, that would be Tyler, our meticulous photographer in our video department. Well, we're here to talk about the happenings of this past weekend at Lambeau Field. And specifically, I'm talking about the annual rookie minicamp, the introduction of the draft class, the undrafted rookies, also several tryout players who were taking a crack at making the 90-man offseason roster. And we'll talk about that a little more later on in the show as well. But rookie minicamp has come and gone now for 2023. And what were your impressions, Wes? What sticks with you as now the next time we're going to see these players on the field will be during OTAs? Got our first look at them this past weekend.
Yeah, as always, Mike, I mean, you take the rookie minicamp with a grain of salt because, one, these guys are just trying to understand the process here in Green Bay. They're trying to teach them how to practice, what the expectations are. And two, it's really our first time getting in front of these players in the locker room. So those are always the biggest two takeaways from this weekend. But I'll be honest with you. In my now 10 years, 12 years covering rookie mini camps, I don't know if I've ever seen anybody more physically impressive than Lukas Van Ness. It's one thing when you and I are sitting here writing these bulletin reports and during the draft and doing the stories and asking the questions afterwards. It's one thing to look at 6'5", 272 pounds, 81-inch wingspan, 17 size shoe, as he told us in the locker room on Friday. But when you actually see him out on the field, and even you look at some of Evan Siegel's photos, Lukas Van Ness, for a 21-year-old man, is a pretty impressive physical specimen. And as important and as deep as this draft, I feel, was for Green Bay, in terms of finding the guy that getting off the bus is going to strike fear into opponents, I think the Packers hit the target with Lukas Van Ness.
Yeah, it is interesting how, because we spend so much time, both pre-draft, during the draft, the heights and weights and all the measurables and the numbers are just the numbers, right? And then suddenly you see these young men in person, and it's like, oh, the numbers actually mean something. They represent something, and they do make a physical impression on you. I was also impressed, not in the same way in terms of just overall stature, but in watching the two tight ends, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. Now, granted, this is just, running around in shorts and helmets, no pads or anything like that. But you can see why the Packers are so high on the athleticism of these tight ends and the potential different dimension that they could bring to the offense. Obviously, there's a long way to go in terms of them, learning the playbook and the coaches figuring out exactly what their roles are going to be and what they do best. But when you see a couple of tight ends that are 6'5", 6'6", and look like, they're maybe a half step slower than the wide receivers, so to speak, not that much difference in terms of that off the line of scrimmage speed and breaking into routes and whatnot. It does make an impression on you, and it'll be interesting just to watch these players develop now through OTAs and then into training camp and put the pads on for the first time. I don't care whether you're Tucker Kraft coming from South Dakota State or whether you're Lukas Van Ness coming from, Iowa in the Big Ten to the NFL. It's a big step physically and mentally. And quite frankly, these young men don't have a whole lot of time, especially if you're going to be counted on to play and contribute early. They don't have a whole lot of time to get ready for it and prepare for it. but but they're going to be asked to do everything they can to be ready for week 1.
Yeah, especially, if Mercedes Lewis isn't back, you have two guys at 6'5", 6'6", in that ballpark of 255 pounds that are I don't want to say only inline traditional tight ends on the roster, but Josiah DeGuara, obviously more of that Swiss Army knife, that H-back type of role. Tyler Davis is still, has the frame to be a really solid tight end, but, was a former college quarterback, had to make that transition to tight end. Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, I mean, these guys have been tight ends since birth, basically. I mean, when you look at the way they're built and then the way in which they can accelerate, I forget who was saying this to me after the rookie minicamp got done, I believe, on Saturday, looking at them running just some of those routes on air. And there was a period where they're, it's the quarterbacks and then some of the assistant coaches are throwing passes. They're doing like 5 wide type sets. And both Kraft and Musgrave took passes underneath. And the way in which they not only caught the ball in rhythm, but then accelerated upfield. Again, there's no pads, there's no defense. You always want to add these caveats, but
yeah,
you can just tell that these guys are different type of athletes. And in that same vein, Jaden Reed, I thought very much came as advertised. The conversation I had with Larry McCarron about this was he's just a smooth football player. He gets in and out of his breaks, and it's one thing to be successful when you're cutting and you're doing change of direction stuff, but when you can do it with fluidity, I think that's where you see these Tyreek Hills of the world sort of separate themselves. And in that regard, I think Jaden Reed has a lot of intangibles that you look for in this next generation of receivers. So as far as those first 2 days of the NFL draft were concerned, I felt like watching those 4 players perform on Friday and Saturday, they are what they are supposed to be from an athletic standpoint.
Yeah, I would totally agree. We also get our first chance, obviously, to meet these players, to talk to them, try to get a sense of their personalities and whatnot a little bit. And over the next, week and a half, 2 weeks, Wes and I will have some follow-up stories on these draft picks based on some of those interviews and other things that we could dig into. But in terms of those impressions, I have to say, I have to give Penn State quarterback Sean Clifford a heck of a lot of credit, because the media comes in for the open locker room session to do interviews. And what's immediately noticed by everybody, of course, is that Sean Clifford is sitting in Aaron Rodgers' old locker. And, it's his nameplate up there, Clifford, number 8. But it's where Rodgers has been forever. Right. And as the media in waves, come up to Clifford to talk to him, he's, asked by, what, maybe at least a dozen different reporters. Hey, did you know that this is Aaron Rodgers? It's like, yeah, I think somebody informed me of that along the way. And to his credit, he even made a joke about it that he came to Green Bay on a pre-draft visit and saw in the locker room where Aaron Rodgers' locker was. And then now when he comes back as a draft pick, like that was his locker. I'd imagine that is something that feels a little overwhelming, but to Clifford's credit, all he talked about, all he's focused on is to learn the playbook, to get the offense down, to play whatever role the coaches need him to play relative to Jordan Love, while also competing, with Danny Etling for the backup quarterback spot. And that competition will really get going, a little bit in OTAs, but even in a more full-fledged sense in, training camp and the preseason games. But the first impression of Sean Clifford is this feels like a very grounded young man who has quite the head on his shoulders, and you can just tell he's an experienced guy. 40 plus starts at Penn State, 30 plus victories as a starting quarterback in the Big Ten, and I think he's going to be an interesting guy to get to know as his rookie season goes along.
Well, and I think the same thing of like a Stetson Bennett, right? Like these guys that have played in big moments in football hungry cities in college campuses. They come in as day 3 picks, but in reality, they kind of have a day 1 mindset in terms of how they approach the job. when you look at Clifford's situation, again, a kid that beat out Will Levis for Penn State's job, he rotated with him the first year there, and then ultimately Levis decided to transfer, and then was the man for the next, 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So the other thing too that I think people have to understand, like, well, why would they give away Aaron Rodgers' locker? With the 13-player draft class, this isn't like the Mike McCarthy era 10 years ago where 7th-round picks were just kind of thrown into the green mile with all the other undrafted guys. The Packers give lockers to all their draft picks in the main area.
In the main locker room, yeah.
If you don't make the team, then they'll transition you back to the practice squad area, the green mile. So with a 13-player draft class and as many returning players as they have, I think there's like maybe 3 lockers in the entire main area right now that aren't spoken for. And one of them is directly next to Jordan Love. And if you know anything about the way that we do press conferences here in Green Bay, you absolutely do not want to have a locker immediately directly next to the starting quarterback. So you need to have some room there for that individual. But all that being said, I thought Clifford took it in stride. And to be honest with you, when you're talking about this, I had a conversation with Sarah Quick, our assistant director of PR, on Saturday after Grant Dubois got done. And I had a really interesting conversation among myself and Grant and Jason Wilde and Cassidy Hill. And I said, I was like, man, I've been blown away by, Grant and a lot of these prospects. And Sarah even mentioned, she's like, yeah, I think all the guys were really good last weekend. And I have to agree. I mean, I thought, if I didn't get to everybody, but between watching the videos and participating in these interviews, you could see why these players jumped off the page to Green Bay, regardless of whether it's a Lukas Van Ness or a kid, like Carrington Valentine from Kentucky, 21 years old in the 7th round. You can just sense that fire with them and just that professionalism and the idea that I'm striving for something more here in Green Bay. And for that reason, I think once training camp comes around in July, this is going to be a very exciting year to be covering the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out over the next couple of weeks. Wes and I will have follow-up stories based on some of those interviews over rookie minicamp weekend on the draft picks. Some interesting stories to be told there. And another story and interview I want to get to in a moment, Wes, but I will take care of some sponsor business. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50 years of better. All right. A story that you, Wes, have already posted on our website earlier this week. The Packers were allocated a player for the first time in what the NFL calls the International Pathway Program, and it's a young man named Kenneth Odumegwu from Nigeria. Has a very interesting story, and you've already written about it. It's on our site for anybody who wants to check it out. I will just say 6'6", 259 pounds. He is quite the athlete. You used to use the phrase physical specimen earlier. He certainly falls into that category, but this is, you talk about literally learning the game of football from scratch and trying to go from being an athlete and a very impressive looking one to all the way to becoming an NFL player as an adult, as a young man. This is going to be a very interesting story here. And he certainly has an interesting story to tell.
Yeah, he definitely does, Mike. And it's funny to me too. You mentioned the physical specimen. Well, much like Lukas Van Ness, who has the nickname Hercules, Kenneth Odumegwu, he actually also has the nickname Hercules. So those two are going to have to kind of banter and battle over this thing, but you can see why. I mean, the most impressive thing about him, in addition to just it was such a fun interaction he had with the media and just kind of telling a little bit of his story and where he comes from. When Odumegwu actually said, a year ago, I didn't even know what a line of scrimmage is, to today, I mean, now being in a position, and he's grateful for it, to learn the game at the highest level from some of the best coaches and practitioners of the sport is going to be very exciting for him. For as much as he didn't know, though, I really give him a lot of credit for the amount of time he spent really diving into the sport. First and foremost, OCU Manura, you look at the International Pathway Program, everything they've done out in London to try to grow the game internationally, but also give people opportunities that maybe not otherwise would have had them to play this sport. Odumegwu is a perfect example of that, because this is a kid that grew up in Nigeria playing soccer. He outgrew the sport. I mean, you don't see a lot of 6'6", 260-pound, soccer players, midfielders out on the field. He transitioned to basketball, and ultimately working through educational basketball program out in Nigeria. They felt like, hey, his best spot potentially could be football. Omenura looked at him, said, hey, you're a defensive end, brought him into his camp at the NFL Africa camp in Ghana. He won the defensive MVP award there. As he said, he still has yet to actually play an organized football game. All of this has been training and combines and all those things, but he's been staying up, since coming to the United States in January. In addition to his physical training he's been reading about this sport. He's been watching videos on YouTube, which is something Omenura kind of suggested to him to do. And he talked about the decision that he made with his parents deciding to try to make a run at the sport. And there was a really good quote in there that I tweeted it afterwards. That was one of my favorite bits. Just one little simple line where he said, there was something inside of me, something inside my heart that made me feel like this is possible. And here he is chasing the dream. He already had a chance to meet Rashawn Gary. He'll be working in that outside linebacker room with Preston Smith and Jason Rebrovich. And a neat moment too on Saturday, he's going out there, he's stretching, and Matt LaFleur, who actually wasn't here on Friday because he was down in Madison for Greg Gard's cancer charity, fundraiser. Just a little bit of a fist step from Matt LaFleur to Odumegwu at the beginning of practice. And it's just like, those are the little moments that, to the onlookers, you might not quite understand what that means. But for a kid like this, that has basically dedicated his life to the past year towards being one of these 8 players that did get allocated to an NFL team, eternally grateful for it. And as he said, he wants to be a pioneer for the sport. He wants to not only try to excel in this and learn how to play it in the NFL level, but also bring it back to his home country and give kids the same opportunity he's been afforded now in Green Bay.
Yeah, well, it's a story that starts out as, the longest of long shots, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds. And the Packers will, as an international pathway program player, he essentially is guaranteed a spot on the 90-man offseason roster all the way through training camp. And then if he doesn't make the 53-man roster, which is the most likely scenario, there is a practice squad exemption for him to be able to stick around. So the Packers, if they want to keep him on the practice squad, he becomes the 17th practice squad player, and you still have your normal allocation of 16 players in that regard. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if I may too, Mike, when you're talking about the longest of long shots, I want to make this point because it's not like, they just found Odumegwu and it's like, yep, you're going to come to the NFL. There was a pretty long process for him to make it. The camp in Ghana, him going to the combine, 38 players were invited to the combine in London, which was, I think, 5 days before at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, 5 days before the Packers played the Giants. From that, only 8 players were selected to be allocated. It's 2 NFL divisions. I believe it was the NFC North. And I want to say it was the AFC West was the other one. Those are the only 2 divisions this year that have this allocation process. It's not like, okay, well, they had 38 players and they just pushed them all around the league. Only 8 guys got to do this. So it tells you exactly how high both O.C. Omenura is on this, but also the NFL to give him this opportunity.
Yeah, and the Packers have already switched him, so to speak. He was in the original announcement. He was announced as a defensive lineman at 6'6", 259. The Packers have decided to try to craft him, mold him as an outside linebacker in, with that Preston Smith sort of size and frame. And hey, if Osi Umenyiora can do something for the Packers aside from break the fans' hearts in some of those
this is
playoff
the
losses previously, maybe something good will come out of that. I kid, of course. Osi Umenyiora is a tremendous ambassador for the NFL, even though he was the enemy to Packers fans on the wrong side of things in some of those postseasons. But we'll close on this one, Wes, as far as the news over the weekend from rookie minicamp. There were 14 players who were invited to the Packers rookie minicamp on a tryout basis. And in that respect, they're, essentially trying to earn a contract as an undrafted rookie, as an undrafted free agent onto that 90-man offseason roster. And the Packers ended up signing 3 tryout players. Broughton Hatcher, a long snapper from Old Dominion, William Hooper, a cornerback from Northwestern State, and Antonio Moultrie, a defensive lineman from Alabama Birmingham, UAB. And on the news side of things, other than obviously watching these players to see if, who might be the next, Lucas Patrick, the tryout that player nobody had ever heard of, who maybe ends up becoming a regular player in the NFL. But Hatcher, the long snapper from Old Dominion, has replaced Jack Coco on the roster, and Hatcher is now the competition for Matt Orzech, the long snapper that the Packers signed, the veteran long snapper who was signed as a free agent, one of the Packers' few free agent acquisitions during the offseason. So as we talked about many times, Rich Bisaccia's, stamp is all over this Packers roster and everything with regard to special teams, and the Packers leaving no stone unturned in that regard here already. A change in terms of the competition that'll be setting up at long snapper as the Packers move into the spring and summer.
Yeah, and obviously for the Green Bay Packers, it continues that cycle they've been going through with long snappers since making the decision to have Steedon Wardle replace Hunter Bradley midway through. I believe that was the 20 season. Listen, this is going to be a situation where, you knew with Matt Orzech that he could be the guy. Not only because of the contract, not only because they signed him as an unrestricted free agent. The Packers had interest in him going back 2 years ago. It just so happened that the Rams, when the Packers tried to claim him, the Rams had a higher waiver claim and were able to get him. And then obviously went and won a Super Bowl there. So he is the incumbent now, I think you would say. He is probably the favorite for it. But Hatcher, there's a lot to like about him. When you look at the fact, I believe when I was reading his bio, he was like the 5th or 6th top recruited, top rated long snapper when he was coming out of high school. Played 35 games for Old Dominion. Old Dominion says that he was never credited with a bad snap during that time. Missed the 20 season because of COVID, missed all but 1 game in 21 because of an ankle injury. But, B.R. Hatcher is a kid that has been doing this at a high level for a number of years. Whereas Jack was making that transition, he was kind of a tweener between tight end and long snapper. Hatcher, this has been his preferred position going all the way back to high school. So he'll be the one that comes in and pushes Orzech, for the job. And unfortunately for Jack, I felt terrible. I sent him a little message after the news came out because I really did enjoy the kid. I have so much respect for what he did and being willing to really put everything he had into becoming a long snapper last year. I think it was a success. The fact that he went from being a tryout, being a guy that hadn't been a long snapper on punts since high school, as far as an in-game setting, and he put himself in a position to be a long snapper here for an entire season, all 17 games. My hat goes off to him. And obviously the Green Bay Packers, as they begin these renovations on special teams and with the specialists, they have 2 new candidates here for the job in 2023.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how that competition unfolds, especially when we get to training camp and the preseason games, where you imagine, both of those guys getting a chance to snap in game action with their Packers uniforms. So with that, we will call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you next time.